Thank you very much, Miriam. Firstly, I'm delighted to report that Donegal seems to be the centre of great debate at the moment in terms of MacGill. In terms of engagement, just looking at RTE this morning, John Murray's programme from Dunfanaghy and the Great Walk. And in terms of creativity, I can point to the front page of today's Irish Times, a fantastic picture taken by amateur photographers over a number of hours to get it right, and it just shows you, the thinking that went into this and the topicality of it as well. It was just a fantastic image and underlines the cauldron in terms of ideas and culture that is here, which I think is great to note. On the topic that we're going to discuss today, I'm afraid I'm not as optimistic, and I echo so much that Roy said. And yes, we are in the face of the perfect storm. A sharp economic downturn in many countries, combined with a dramatic shift in consumption patterns and diminishing traditional brand loyalty, means much of the rich and diverse blend of media in Europe is under threat, and under grave threat. In that turbulent mix are some great newspapers and public service broadcasters. The phrase, "once great," is likely to be applied to many who will fall by the wayside. A heavy cost is likely to be paid to the detriment of society and democracy. The open internet has democratized content and enriched the conversation with the reader. There has been tremendous change in terms of participation, but social media have also disrupted robust news gathering. Many in the new camp of breaking news don't apply the same system as the big established players. This has helped fuel a mistaken view that old-fashioned news gathering and verification is of less merit. It has been described elsewhere as abandoning journalism for the tyranny of the click. In addition, some long-established media are losing out in the time war zone, especially on the crowded battleground of commoditized news, where first is more important than accurate, or where patterns of consumption, i.e. page impressions or high metrics, dictate content above all else. That said, I'm not advocating that we maintain the fail-safe approach of many decades, summed up by the dictum, "we will tell you the news." The Irish Times is acutely aware of the major forces at play. We are embracing a scale of change that is arguably the most significant in our 150-year history. Leading the liberalisation and opening up of Ireland in the 1960s and 1970s was perhaps the greatest philosophical shift of the paper's history, a repositioning that profoundly changed its character and readership. With others like RTE, we were among the most influential agents of change then. Today, it's about the fundamentals of how you inform and engage with the audience of 2012, time-pressed and distracted by a multitude of devices and an avalanche of content, much of which is of dubious merit or news value. And yet, media consumption is at an unprecedented level. The challenge today is also a qualitative one. We believe there is a place for quality journalism underpinned by a strong degree of trust in that space. That noble aspiration is not always achieved in the news business, but it should motivate us in all cases. We in the Irish Times aim to distinguish ourselves from the white noise of the web with insight, context, explanation, clarity, and a unique take on Ireland and on the world through Irish eyes. It requires resonating with the modern lives of our readers and consumers of all ages. That applies equally to a newspaper as to a digital device. In my view, it entails being a genuine, original and responsive multimedia company while using the platform of an outstanding newspaper in the broadest sense, reinforced by our strong news base. Tablet and iPad editions are already showing how progressive newspapers can stand out in that frontier. In any event, for those who are going to flourish, it necessitates embracing innovation and the latest in content management technology at every turn. At this juncture, many media organisations, though, are falling into the trap of reducing journalistic resources to a large scale. To be frank, the Irish Times is subject to similar pressure to follow the same course as we contend with the recession that is lingering so painfully for so many within Irish society. How we wish for a 6-year recession rather than the classic 10-year one. Some media organisations who are debt-ridden or over-leveraged have no choice in that regard. Yet, I contend journalistic firepower is vital. Firstly, it is needed for survival, in the shape of a distinct presence driven by strong combined print and digital content at a time of uncertainty and unrelenting upheaval in the marketplace. That is the core that provides us with the best chance of a sustained future, in my book. From a broader perspective, well-resourced newsrooms are necessary to support and to bring to account those who run our democracies, though some politicians may be sceptical of their ability to do so. Moreover, they are needed to expose the systemic failures of our political systems that have brought so many states, including Ireland, to the brink of financial ruin. Robust, quality media companies, including public service broadcasters, provide the best forum for journalism and discussion surrounding the pursuit of meaningful political reform. Politics during the first decade of the 21st century, despite the remarkable commitment of a great many, has failed Ireland. The Constitutional Convention is a welcome first step towards addressing a crisis of failed accountability, but it doesn't sufficiently pursue change to the way politics is done in this country. Its ambitions are modest in the face for demand that is wide-ranging and seeking credible reform. There is every reason to believe that referring a controversial issue to the Convention will be a convenient way of putting off having to do something about it before the end of this parliamentary term. That said, a move to regulate lobbying, to extend the Freedom of Information Act and to reform the court system outside that process adds more substance to the Coalition's reform agenda. And it was reassuring to see Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Brendan Howlin, note recently that he places equal weight on the need to reform politics and public life as the need to restore stability to our finances. The new French President, François Hollande, has announced an initiative to introduce more morality to French politics and public life. What's more, the headline changes are due to be formulated to a large extent by November. How would we react if Taoiseach Enda Kenny was to announce he wanted to introduce more morality into Irish politics within such a time frame? I suspect it would be greeted with much derision and insistence it was an impossible deadline, though the cause is just and the need for change so pressing. The most important point from the perspective of our discussions today is that all our native media, print and broadcast, need to play a central role in helping reshape our democracy. The Irish Times is committed to its part in that process, notably in engaging our constituents and in broadening the debate and placing it in the context of the type of society we want and need. It is more than compatible with the memorandum and articles of our trust. We need pertinent reportage and analysis that will pave the way for the best possible reform package as we audit and re-evaluate our credentials as a modern republic in the run-up to 1916. Hyped, reactive journalism, increasingly a mix of news and often mixed with misinformed comment, should not be allowed to drive the reform agenda. We are not best served by those who jump on the perceived issue of the day using such an approach. An obsession with emotive yet minor issues such as allowances paid to politicians and salaries paid to their advisers is the obvious manifestation of that mode of seeking accountability. Against that backdrop, is it no wonder that some claim a significant element of government policy seems to be dictated by how it will be perceived in the media? Turbulence playing out within the Irish media landscape is against the backdrop of fierce competition. A growing concentration of cross-media ownership is further reducing diversity and plurality. The Irish Times, through its various digital platforms, is in the process of transformation. It is serving a growing online audience and seeking to identify new business models while attempting to preserve its mix of quality, independent journalism. This is with a view to securing its long-term future, but also its distinct presence on the island of Ireland and as a significant counterweight to concentrated ownership among a small, powerful elite whose dominance goes beyond media. Besides our own homegrown media moguls, it includes the particular brand of dominance exercised by British media companies, of which Sky is the most obvious, followed by News International. Then there are the Googles, the Apples, the Facebooks and giant telecoms who are taking ownership of key infrastructure. Measuring the extent of dominance and control by all of these big players in that highly complex multimedia mix is a task, a huge task. How do you measure the metric share of consumption? What of digital domination on a global scale? And we haven't even spoken about pricing policy that can obliterate the small player. The scale of abuses of journalistic practice in the UK has dominated deliberations in the Leveson inquiry, and the focus has understandably been on how to regulate press content, complaints and standards. But as Guardian editor Alan Rushbridger noted recently, part of Lord Justice Leveson's brief is to also think about plurality, how to stop media power being concentrated in a few hands, and it is every bit as important as the remodelling of self-regulation. He noted the plurality debate was not just about Murdoch, nor is it simply about size. It includes issues of choice, but that too could be problematic. He cited the example of Australia. The choice was becoming between Murdoch and Murdoch on steroids, referring to the new face of Fairfax Media. You also have to factor in the economics of news, which is undergoing fundamental revolution, so nothing can be taken for granted. He listed 7 critical questions that have to be asked, engaging the potential threat to plurality, a sort of scorecard on issues of eternal governance, complying with the law, political influence, and being subject to normal scrutiny. The questions are: does the media organisation have strong internal governance? Is it effectively externally regulated? Is it subjected to and does it comply with the law? Is it subjected to normal scrutiny by press and parliament? Does it overtly try to exert public political influence? Does it privately lobby over regulation or competition issues? Does it actively work to expose the private lives of politicians or other public figures? Minister for Communications Pat Rabbitte has underlined the government's commitment to bringing forward a new law on media mergers. Applying those criteria to the Irish media marketplace would be a useful exercise as part of his deliberations. The independence of the Irish Press Council and Ombudsman from both the newspaper industry and the state is vital in our country. Getting the balance right on issues of privacy that are in tune with our cultural attitudes is also needed. Critically, I think we got the mix right, especially by way of incorporating statutory recognition. The threat of it was sufficient to impose better standards, as Ombudsman Professor John Horgan noted before Leveson recently. Going down the route of statutory regulation in Britain would be fraught with difficulty, in my view. It would risk being amended out of all recognition by a Conservative-led coalition, while many in its ranks display considerable antipathy towards UK media. Others vehemently contend the gross errors and appalling practices of News International and others will require a degree of statutory backup. To be brutally honest, I don't know where Lord Leveson will come down in bringing the British press to heel, or at least tempering its excesses. That is not to say I'm unconcerned at what might emerge. Getting the balance wrong may erode free speech to an unacceptable extent. An unfair, restrictive regime might pave the way for changes in Ireland by dint of sheer weight of political and public opinion.
Leveson, as Roy has remarked, has indicated more than a passing interest in the Irish model. There is strong speculation he may recommend key elements of our system, possibly backed up by significant penalties. Some have advocated levy fines of up to £1 million in cases of systemic breakdowns in ethical behaviour or internal governance. When it comes to the practice of journalism, there are significant differences between us and Britain. There, the shocking failures have been laid bare: poor internal governance, if not cover-up, within tabloid newspapers, evidence to suggest criminality of reporters and senior editors, a distinctly unhealthy relationship between journalists, police officers and politicians, all capped by a failure or unwillingness to investigate and regulate the practice, market dominance and relationships of key elements within that pit in the public interest. In Ireland, I contend our newspapers have served our republic to a better extent. We are not perfect, the Irish Times included. Our regulatory structure has been shown to be robust and has achieved buy-in from citizens, politicians and the newspaper industry, but that is not in any way to suggest complacency. Failures of journalism reflect on all in the content business and undermine credibility, even when we attempt to act in the public interest. The pressures I have outlined in the Irish context are likely to get worse before they get better. There are more opportunities to get things wrong, as we all know, to our costs, especially when journalistic resources are being pared back, our time demands and groupthink are allowed to take precedence over old-fashioned, painstaking sourcing. The threats to survival for all native newspapers and broadcasters are real, and the related plurality issue remains unaddressed. The digital revolution, on the one hand, is uplifting, even exhilarating, a great liberalisation of the content business. As Craig Silverman of the Nyman Institute noted recently, it is a new age for truth. Never has it been so easy to expose an error, check a fact, crowdsource and bring technology to bear in service of a verification. But it is also a place where commentary frequently fails the fairness test. The conversation can be far from civilised. Some people seem to find it easier to believe a rumour. That aside, and most importantly from my perspective, there is a place for quality newspapers in this exciting, open, disruptive digital era. I am convinced that an ever-changing Irish Times will stand out in that space. Thank you very much.